Nothing on the Bonnell Foundation's Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast should be considered medical advice. Medical advice can only come from your CF physician. Cystic fibrosis can be a devastating diagnosis, but living with the disease can bring positivity and a new appreciation for each day. From the Bonnell Foundation in Detroit, Michigan, it's the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast, sponsored by Viatris, Genentech, and Vertex. Here's your host, Laura Bonnell.
We're talking with Rachel Alder today, or Ray as she likes to be called. She's been an advocate her entire life. Rachel, who is African American, was not diagnosed with cystic fibrosis until she was 26 years old. And that's just this past January. It's still unbelievable to those of us advocating and raising awareness about the disparity in diagnosing people of color. As a reminder, anyone, regardless of race, can be diagnosed with cystic fibrosis. It's a genetic disease. Ray is a transracial adoptee, which means that she was adopted by parents with a different race. Ray identifies as queer and a full-time CF warrior. In the beginning of her career, she worked on diversity, victim advocacy with survivors of sexual assault, human trafficking, and domestic violence. And after her January CF diagnosis, she started focusing on patient advocacy and specifically on health equity. Ray herself overcame racial bias, health disparity, and a decline in her own health until her diagnosis. You just will not believe this story. And Rachel, it's so wonderful, and I'll call you Ray because that's the name that you like to go by. So it's wonderful to have you. I'm so glad you reached out to us about just volunteering and getting involved. And then I started looking at your social media and who you are and read about you. And I'm just so impressed with the person that you are. So thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it is wonderful. And as I said in the introduction, it is just unbelievable and sad and maddening that it took until 26 years old for you to get diagnosed just because you're African American. I mean, we are trying to get the word out there that anyone can have cystic fibrosis. I mean, when I say I can't believe it, of course I can believe it, but it is maddening. Tell us about your lifetime struggle with getting this diagnosis and how it came about.
Absolutely. So really from infancy, I had signs and symptoms of having some sort of disease, something going on. We didn't have any family history growing up. I was adopted, and so there was no things to look for or knowledge or any answers to give doctors as I would go for these issues growing up because we had that lack of family history. That definitely added a level of complication, but things like dislocating joints as an infant or from infancy, I started having issues with weight really on the typical things you'd hear, a lot of respiratory infections, getting sick a lot of coughing.
And
then unfortunately,
I'm sorry, I just wanted to point out when you said because, of the adoption, you didn't have any history. We didn't have that history either. And I just want to point out that that's why this is so maddening. We didn't have history, but because we are white, I believe that it was more of a possibility. So just continue, because I just want to and we didn't have newborn screening either at that time.
Exactly.
So go on.
Exactly.
Sorry to interrupt, but I wanted to point that out because things need to get better. But go ahead.
They do. Yeah. And ultimately, though, family history is what ended up partially leading to my diagnosis. So I'll circle back to that part. But as a child and teenager, they were just written off by primary care physicians and doctors as growing pains. You'll grow out of it. It's typical. I was expected to be pretty tall in my height projection. So they, chalked that up to going to be a tall person. So you're going to have the growing pains. And I was growing rather quickly as well. So it really just got dismissed, a lot of the symptoms that I was having. And up until really graduating high school, they were pretty much written off and dismissed throughout all of childhood. And then that's when kind of things really hit a peak of, okay, there really is something going on here, and they were unable to deny that any further at that point.
So
So
where was the change? When did that come in? What happened to get you to your diagnosis point?
so I was playing, I had earned a spot in collegiate athletics as a dual sport, doing swimming and water polo in Southern California. I was living what I call my dream year of sports all day, school, and more sports all day. It was quite a dream come true in Southern California, getting to leave Utah and go on an exciting adventure. But unfortunately, by the end of that first year, my first full season of having played, uh, I really had the GI manifestations kick in full force. I was really struggling with GI bleeding they couldn't explain, just some weird factors that weren't adding up. I wasn't able to run. I wasn't able to keep up with like the dryland exercises we were expected to do, lifting weights in the gym, things I had been doing for years. And I'm at the peak of my game, right? This is college. I was the most conditioned I had ever been as far as swimming and cardio, yet my body was falling apart instead of doing what it should have been doing, which was continuing to get stronger. And so I had to leave, unfortunately, and came home very determined to find answers. And when I came home to find those answers, I ended up in rheumatology with a misdiagnosis of lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. And they began heavily treating that for about 4 or 5 years with really, really toxic drugs for those two ailments. And I just kept getting worse. I was going downhill really quickly and continued to have that nagging gut feeling like this isn't the right path. I don't think we're treating the right thing. I don't feel like this is correct. I should have some improvement. I know it's not a cure, but I am not feeling okay. And these meds are not helping. In fact, I feel confident they're making it worse. And so at that point, I really just trusted my gut and started searching around for answers and kind of learning to really become my own advocate at that point. And this was about 2019, nearing 2020. I was working full time. I'd found my career passion, which was victim advocacy, working with survivors of sexual assault, human trafficking, domestic violence. It was a niche that I really felt a passion for and a love for, but was finding myself less and less physically able to do. There's a lot of physical demand. You're showing up in the emergency department at 2 o'clock in the morning to respond to an assault, to advocate for your client, to help give them the services they need. And I just couldn't keep up with that. And I was 22, 23 at the time. So, again, another pretty gravely concerning thing considering I'm on treatment. I've been doing what I've been told by these doctors, yet here we still are. And then COVID came and really sent me down a hill as far as respiratory symptoms go. I'd always had periodic pneumonia or bronchitis or infections growing up, but this really set me back. I had double COVID pneumonia, both lungs. I had the ground glass. It was just really severe respiratory events going on and kind of triggered a cycle of those subsequently. And so we went to Mayo Clinic in 2022 to just say, hey, let's see a geneticist. This just doesn't add up. And so we did. They did genetic testing and formalized my diagnosis of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is an inherited connective tissue disorder. And they also gave me a formal diagnosis of postural orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, or POTS. And that explained a lot of what was going on. Some of the treatments started to help, yet the respiratory symptoms persisted and got worse. And so I knew we still weren't quite at the finish line yet. I started seeing the local CF clinic in 2021-ish, I would say, for just that recurrent pneumonias and infections. And they diagnosed me with bronchiectasis and just had all these questions going on. So I had also discovered of a family history a couple years before. You have to wait till you're 18 to get any real information, at least with how adoption was done back when I was adopted. So I found out I had some first cousins with cystic fibrosis, and I knew enough about it to know that I do want to have kids. I should probably just have that genetic testing panel done. We were
Mhm.
doing some other genetic testing as well at the time with Mayo. So I said, hey, can you just tack this on as a test? Found out about this history, and I want to know for the sake of having kids if I'm a carrier. And they said, yeah, totally makes sense. We'll add it on. And got quite the surprising call 3 weeks later that, hey, these other tests are okay, but the cystic fibrosis, the CFTR panel came back interesting. And I said, what's interesting about it? I didn't, my knowledge of CF is that you could only be diagnosed at birth at this point, and that was really the gist of what I knew about it. And so she said, well, you have two mutations. And I said, okay, so I'm a carrier, right? And as that's not ideal, but there's ways to work around that and whatnot. And she says, no, one gene's a carrier, two means that you would typically have CF. And I said, but I'm an adult. And she said, yeah, I know, we're gonna refer you to some people. And really tried to just kind of talk down the conversation, I think, a little, so I didn't maybe panic in the moment, because I had
Mhm.
no clue what was beginning.
Right.
Thankfully, I think, too, I was a little naive, which I think was a good thing at the time. And um, that's when I had my first referral to CF clinic. And again, about 2021. But when I went there and we did the sweat testing, it was negative. And so then everyone's confused.
Mm.
I had the symptoms, I had the genetic testing confirmation, I had the family history confirmation, yet this sweat test was really confusing everyone. It was quite perplexing. So they treated me as a non, or the term atypical CF was used in my treatment. And we went through this rigorous cycle of a year and a half of doing some outpatient treatment for the bronchiectasis, and being a CF carrier is what they called it on my documentation. And just a vicious cycle of exacerbation, hospitalization, 2 weeks antibiotics, send me home, but then no CF treatment at home because I didn't have CF in their opinion. And so it just really created this rapid deterioration over a period of 1.5 years that was really scary, and led all the way up until this last January. And in that year and a half time period, there was 10 or 11 hospitalizations
Wow.
in under 2 years. And so I was just there all the time. And the stuff they were giving me in the hospital were typical CF treatments like Pulmozyme, things like that. And I was getting better inpatient. They were helping. I was getting enzymes through my tube feeds at the time. And I would start to do really, really well at the end of those admissions, and then get sent home. Well, we can't send you home with any of those things because you don't have CF. Okay, but they're helping me get better, and you're sending me home to nothing new. And so it was just this really frustrating and confusing kind of cycle of almost gaslighting, if you will. Why are we treating me with these things then if I don't need them? But you're giving me to them here and not at home, and then I get worse. So I don't understand this cycle. I don't feel like this is good for my body. And so this January was my last one of those hospitalizations. Same thing, 10 days, antibiotics, got better, sent me home, nothing new. And I knew if I kept doing that cycle, I really felt like I was going to die if we just kept doing this over and over again. I didn't know how much more I could take.
Right.
And so I reached out of desperation to a cystic fibrosis group on Facebook. Thank heavens I did, and just said, hey, SOS here, like, this is what's happening. This doesn't feel right to me. Can can one of you maybe explain to me if I'm wrong here, or if I'm crazy? Am I incorrect in this thinking? And they said, you need to get in touch with Michelle and Terry Wright. right now.
Oh my gosh,
And they
great
connected
advice.
me to, yes, they connected me right then and there on Facebook to Michelle and Terry Wright.
And anyone listening
And
who doesn't know Michelle and Terry Wright, they started the National Organization for African Americans with Cystic Fibrosis. And Terry was not diagnosed until he was 54 years old because he's African American and doctors didn't think he could have CF. So continue. Thanks.
thank you. Yes. And so spoke with them very briefly. She called me on the phone immediately. I was like just blown away by their just blatant willingness to show up and help the situation. And she said, you do whatever it takes to get to National Jewish to see Dr. Jennifer Taylor Kauser, whatever it takes. You need to get there now. And I mean, I would tell you it's probably not a week and a half later, we were down in Denver, and it took her one day and one nasal potential difference test and one look over my medical history, my notes. In that one appointment, I had a diagnosis of cystic fibrosis. I had Trikafta prescribed. I had Pulmozyme prescribed. I had consults galore prescribed. I had every single thing I had been needing so desperately, really my whole life, but especially those last couple years, right there. And it was just so mind-boggling that I couldn't get what I needed 10 minutes up the road, but here at this center, I had everything I needed in one day. It just really was just such a gift, and something I'm so grateful for is her and her efforts to, along with Terry and Michelle and Noah Seth, to help find people like myself and Terry that unfortunately just get stuck in that old incorrect stereotype about CF and what it looks like.
And it's so sad, doesn't even express how I feel about the misdiagnosis. I mean, this is 2023 and everybody's been working so hard to raise awareness. It's just, we just have to keep getting the word out because it is so sad. And like you, thank goodness you were 26 when you were diagnosed. I mean, you're half a lifetime ahead of when Terry was diagnosed, right?
Exactly.
But so I guess that's progress, but it's definitely not where it should be, but now you're advocating and you're part of the solution and you're part of the education and the advocacy, which is wonderful. We need you. So you get the diagnosis, and Dr. Jennifer, fabulous also. I have not met her in person, but she's wonderful. So
she's incredible.
Yeah, she is incredible. So tell us, so you get this diagnosis. How do you feel? How does your family feel? And then how does your health journey start from January till now? It's only 4 months.
Yeah. I would have to say, at first it was definitely this disbelief because it was the nasal potential test takes about 45 minutes. And as soon as that's done, we're in her office meeting with her. And it's just so matter of fact, like we're already talking about it, like as if that's already confirmed. I'm like, okay, wait, can we go back for a minute? Because this has been years, of seeking this. So I really had to just have that clarification and kind of, I think validation was a crucial thing at this point after feeling gaslit for so long through this, CF journey of diagnosis that it really, I just needed to take a moment and the profoundness of feeling heard and feeling seen are inexplicable in that moment. The sense of relief, the sense of feeling validated, believed, seen, but to also have it happening from a physician who looks like you, who is advocating for people like you. There really just was a moment I had to just kind of soak that all in appreciation and gratitude, but also in mourning because, there is so much time lost. And from what little I knew of CF at the time, I still knew that wasn't good. And I knew that wasn't fair. So that really was, bittersweet really is the only word I think can describe that moment. The relief of a diagnosis, the sadness of the reality of what that diagnosis is, but also the hope and trust of a care team and a center that saw me and that got it right. So really trust was such a crucial piece to beginning that health journey that you mentioned, and also to my parents, my family, of them experiencing that validation of us being seen and heard and being in the right place for what was going on. I think it really was just a collective relief and a collective mourning at the same time. And then followed by a absolute mountain of a learning curve for all of us has been really where we've been at the last 4 months.
Um, yeah, it is incredible. And as told me, and I stated in the introduction, so transracial adoption did because your parents look different than you, do you think that played a role in the misdiagnosis also?
I do. I think that definitely, plays a role. I think it's tricky to advocate for yourself as a person of color when your family members aren't people of color. That definitely makes things tricky. I think it's confusing for doctors. And I also think that having that component of having been adopted, there's a lot of negative connotations with foster youth and those that have been adopted. I think medically, there's a tend to over medicate those types of kids, like myself. That was something I experienced early on, for being overactive and hyper, things like that. They tend to mask. Can you still hear me?
I can still hear you. Yes. Yeah.
Okay,
You
good.
lost one of the
Okay,
AirPods, but yeah,
I lost one of them.
it's okay. It's still
Okay,
going.
okay. Um, I was gonna say, so I think that sometimes that trauma can be misinterpreted in medical communities as a need to over medicate, instead of really get to the root of what's going on, especially in the foster care system. That's a really big issue that we have in America. So yeah, I think that all of those factors may have played into a little bit more dismissal, a little more kind of invalidation from physicians and the medical community in the beginning, especially. But yeah, it's a tricky thing to navigate when you're dealing with a racial disparity in healthcare, but you don't have that same understanding or experience in your own parents. It's a really complex thing to learn to navigate on your own.
And I bet, first of all, and I want to get back to that, but I wanted to ask you, did you go back to the original CF clinic that you were at, or living in Utah, are you flying to Colorado all the time for treatment?
Yeah, I've chosen not to go back at this time. And so I am going back and forth to Colorado, which is very tricky. But I feel that I trust and I'm in the right hands there with Dr. Taylor Kauser. And it is just so critical to feel that element of trust and being seen with something as important and serious as treating cystic fibrosis. So for right now, that's the plan, and I feel confident going forward that way. And yeah, but I've been in contact with them and let them know about my diagnosis, and really hope to work with them to lessen this problem. That's really my biggest goal. To know that it's still happening is something that keeps me up at night, quite frankly. And how many more people of color have we missed in the system? How many more like myself and Terry are out there at whatever ages they may be that aren't getting this treatment and this access to healthcare right now?
Mm-hmm.
And that's definitely propelled my advocacy and my desire to share my story and get involved with NOSF and be their patient ambassador to really help find the other ones out there. We have to.
Absolutely. And I, you know, I wondered, Was there any point, did you go back to your biological parents and say, hey, just so you know, I do in fact have cystic fibrosis? Was that important to you to do?
That was recommended from the genetic counselor that I spoke to at the time of letting me know about the mutations. So I did. I let them know. I knew that on my biological father's side, there was some awareness because that's where there had been the family history. So I did let them know just to further that. But I know that they're very well educated and know what to look for. And I believe there had already been testing done, so it wasn't as important. But on the maternal side, I definitely had to let him know and say, hey, get tested to see if you're a carrier and things like that for some biological siblings there. So, yeah, that was important to me. I wanted to make sure that, especially given the situation with race and ethnicity and CF, I wanted to make sure that everyone that should be tested was. So,
And the other thing that I'm sure you're aware of now is there is so much work to do. Even in newborn
mhm,
screening that didn't start till 2007, all the people of color aren't being tested in the newborn screening because those tests are mainly for Caucasians. In Michigan, we only test 60 mutations of the 2000. So we definitely have a lot of work to do, right? I mean, it's still unbelievable.
absolutely. It is, and it's deeply concerning in regards to my mutation specifically. One is more common, and that's the one shared with the family history. But the second one I have is one I think of seven ever documented, and so there's no classification of this mutation. There's no knowledge of it, and there's really no literature from what I've been able to find and what I've been told on it much at all. And so, in terms of newborn screenings and things like that, it's scary to think about. Would it even flag on a newborn screen these more rare mutations? So there's a lot of work to be done to make sure we have more equitable access to screening, testing, diagnosis in this world for sure.
And then I'm going to have our editor, I'm just writing down the time, edit this part out that I'm going to tell you. We can't mention Trikafta because of sponsorship. So when you refer to Trikafta, say specialty modulator or
Okay.
triple combo drug. But it's fine for the one
Okay.
time, just FYI. Um, so, and my next question is, what were these past 4 months like? I mean, I see you have a port. What it was so much new things for you. What tell us what the past 4 months were like medically for you?
They have been pretty rough. As mentioned, I was hospitalized at the beginning of the year. So through New Year's, I was doing a hospitalization for an exacerbation, and then went right after that to Colorado, had a few days there, just lots of testing, and then came home to the world of grants, applications, paperwork, things like that for medications and whatnot. And then, unfortunately, with starting one of the specialty modulators, I had a quite severe like allergic reaction to it that ended up in a full flare exacerbation, if you will, which we flew to Colorado for, and I was there for 18 days, I believe. We were doing inpatient stay there for antibiotics, treatment, whatnot, to really calm down all that inflammation, steroids, high doses, things like that. So that also unmasked some CF related diabetes that we didn't know about. So really just created a kind of a storm in my body. And that's really been what we've been dealing with for the last month or so, as far as treatment and care go. And so just trying to recover from that. And then we're actually going back out to Colorado tomorrow, excuse me, to start a desensitization attempt at one of the modulators to see if I can tolerate it that way. So
So they
that's the
took
hope.
you,
But in the mean,
I'm sorry, they took you
mhm,
off
yeah,
the,
I had to stop.
okay. So the same thing happened to one of my daughters. Of the two that were on
Really?
the specialty drug, one had a rash from head to toe, and her throat closed
Hmm.
up and had welts, and we ended up in the emergency room.
Yes.
But there is hope because she was desensitized to the drug. I've
Really?
learned so much, and they put it in a liquid form, and she took, I think, 0.25 dosage for 5 weeks, and then they introduced
Okay.
the pills. And I she just a couple days ago allowed me to speak about this, and I was actually had a speaking engagement to a CF Education Day in Omaha, Nebraska Saturday, and started crying because it was the first time I talked about it publicly, and it's so important to the CF world and for your hope for the future. So I know how important this is to you, but I just hope and pray that this desensitization will work for you as it did for my daughter. Doctors and scientists, they're so smart. They just
They
blow
are.
me away on a daily basis. So we're cheering you on with that.
Well, thank you. It's comforting to hear a firsthand experience because I haven't yet. So that's definitely comforting because yeah, there's a lot of weight, there's a lot of pressure on something like that and what it can mean futuristically. So that's fantastic for your daughter. I'm glad to hear that that's worked for her.
Yes, and I hope it works for you as well because mentally you had so much hope
Thank you.
for it, right? Your You
Yes.
and your parents were like, "Yes, this is the answer." It's
Yep.
it's so hard.
Absolutely. It is hard. It was very disheartening, especially the work that you go through to even just obtain it. That was pretty mind-blowing to me because, being new to the world and everything, but just the sheer amount of phone calls and time spent. I know you're well familiar with that, but that was a new thing for me. And so to have all that build up and all that work put in, yeah, it was very disheartening, but you know, there is a level of optimism from the team, and I'm just trying to hold on to that. So we'll give it a go.
It is wonderful, and it is, I can't even exactly put into words that, I mean, I'm sorry you have cystic fibrosis, but I'm so glad you're part of our community. I know it's such a weird thing, but CF as a diagnosis has given us, my girls and my husband and all of us, really oddly a love of life, right? An appreciation that perhaps
Hmm.
we wouldn't have had before. And our community is so tight. Like we're all experiencing the same or similar things. And so I'm
Hmm.
just glad that you're choosing to advocate because we definitely need your voice. You have so much to say. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. It's definitely been a wonderful community to discover and to be welcomed into and to be educated by. And I mean, if it weren't for the community itself, I wouldn't have my diagnosis in the first place. That's what helped me get to the right place. And so my love and appreciation for the community will always be profound and that of gratitude. And so I want to do anything and everything I can to give back. Speaking and advocacy have been things that have been intricate parts of my life since early childhood, being the only person of color in my community and my family. I had to learn how to have my own voice very early on and how to be willing to stand against the crowd and say what needs to be said. Otherwise, people won't have an opportunity to learn if you're not willing to do that. And sometimes that's a hard responsibility and burden to bear, but um, really it's just become what I feel my purpose and meaning to be is that of advocacy, to be an advocate. And so to have one more realm to jump into advocacy with has actually been a very healing and exciting part of my journey to take what I love to do, what my passion is, what my career has been, to apply it to a new world that has such a deep level of meaning and significance to me personally, but also that is just such important work has been really the most healing part of my journey with cystic fibrosis thus far. So I'm very grateful.
And In your advocacy and raising awareness, have you come across anyone like yourself or others in the African American CF community that are still being diagnosed late? Or like what kind of experience have you had since, I know it's only 4 months that you've had this diagnosis, so it is a short time, but what are you experiencing as you reach out?
Yeah, so having been named the patient ambassador for the National Organization of African Americans with CF, I've had some opportunities to connect with some other folks that are even in that actual process themselves of seeking proper diagnosis through the screening tool that Dr. Jennifer Taylor Kauser and Terry Wright and Michelle Wright came up with together. So I've had opportunities through them to find and connect with other folks that are in the process. I've also attended BreatheCon, which had a segment for BIPOC folk, which I was over the moon excited about, and I met some folks there that had been late diagnosed as well. So definitely always looking for opportunities, but there does need to be a little more community, a little more I guess formalized way to connect with folks in the same situation. That's definitely something I'm hoping to facilitate in the future. That there's a way to find and chat with other people that are in a similar boat for the reason of their race, and delayed diagnosis. That would be a dream of mine to see be a resource at some point.
Hmm. And what are you thinking about your future? A little bit of what you just talked about, but as far as your health goes, and your advocacy.
Yeah, I think this is a really big piece futuristically of what I want to do. As mentioned, I worked in a very niche area of advocacy before, working as a victim as survivor advocate, and I loved that. But the reality is at least where my health is at the moment, that's just not realistic, and I'm having to learn to be okay with that, at least for now. But finding this new area of advocacy within CF and within health equity and patient advocacy, I really hope can become sort of a new career path in a way, something that I can spend my time and energy learning more about and working to better use my voice in advocating for. So I really feel like it's kind of almost created this new path, which has been a gift. Because it's disheartening to have to walk away from careers and things that you love due to health. That's a really hard aspect of disease. And I might say it's one of the hardest, because you have this passion, right? And you find what you love. And I feel so grateful to have done that so early in life. I recognize that sometimes it takes folks years and years and years to discover what they love. And I was fortunate enough to just be so loud in my advocacy by the time I reached 18 that I couldn't help myself but find that area of passion right away. And looking back, I think that was inspired. I really do, and I think I live and experience what I love to do. And now I'm just having to find creative new ways to still do it, but in a different arena or in a different setting, and that's more than okay.
It's wonderful.
So,
You're so wise in the short time that you've had a diagnosis, even though it was a long time to go there, or to get there. You know, I love that you're sharing your story and you're definitely changing lives, and we appreciate it. And so many others you haven't even met yet are going to appreciate all you're doing because, I mean, you have so much to offer. It's really important. So thank you. Anything else that you wanted to add about your experience or how your parents are feeling now, before we wrap up?
yeah, I think for them, it's mostly just that sense of relief of we're in the right hands. Knowing and trusting a team is, I think, a massive, massive deal, even though I don't have quite as much literacy or understanding of the CF world and community. But the importance of care team I've learned is just, it's something you can't accurately quantitate its importance. I feel like it's just the most vital thing, to be in hands you trust, to feel like they understand you, your body, your trajectory, and have a good game plan in place that everyone feels good about, everyone's on board with. And they've been really good to help educate my parents. I did a lot of my own education. That's just how I am. And so I felt quite knowledgeable in regards to CF by the point of my diagnosis, but I feel like my parents had to do a little bit of catching up, fairly so. It's so much to learn, and they've been really good about helping kind of educate my parents as we go. And so that's been really helpful to not feel that that's entirely on myself. So I'm very grateful for that, for resources like what you provide and what so many others in the community provide have been so helpful to my family to jump into this so late in the game, if you will. And I'm just so grateful for all the organizations like this one, like just all of them that have that advocacy and educational piece, because families like mine are dependent upon it. We have to have it. We don't have another way to just jump in and get going if you don't have that firsthand perspective from families, from lived experience. So I'm just beyond grateful for all of those resources, as are my parents.
Well, I'm so glad and appreciate hearing that. Thank you. And I want everyone to know that in show notes, we have information about the National Organization for African Americans with Cystic Fibrosis. I also want to offer up to your parents to go on our website, the Bonnell Foundation website. The CF Masterclass is all parent perspective about raising children with cystic fibrosis and adults. And so that would be really helpful for them as well. And it's just important, to have these resources. The other thing, I want to mention it during the podcast because I want to continue promoting what CODA is, and the acronym escapes me what it stands for at this moment. But what they do is they help anybody with many chronic diseases financially. So it's like a GoFundMe, except you don't pay taxes, because CODA is COTA, also in our show link, is a nonprofit. So they could help pay for your flight, to and from Utah. In addition to the financial assistance you should apply for through the Bonnell Foundation. I'm just reminding everyone listening to our podcast, there is so much help. So anybody can email the Bonnell Foundation. I can give people links, but they're also in the show notes. But it's important that this gets passed on as well, because sometimes people don't know where to go for information, right? So.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's been the thing that's blown me away the most about this community, is the support, the resources that are available, and just that general, like I said, willingness to come together and help each other out. It's a really, really beautiful aspect of the community, and one that's been very humbling to be on the receiving end of. So much, much gratitude to you, to everyone that's been part of that. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing this podcast with us and helping to raise awareness again about a diagnosis with cystic fibrosis. It was delightful to talk to you, and I know we'll be in contact much more in the future. Thank you, Rachel.
I look forward to it. Thank you. I appreciate it.
The original music in this podcast is performed by Kevin Allen.
It's not complicated.
Who happens to have cystic fibrosis.
We all got our worries and fears. I know it's got you frustrated, but loving you is so alright.
This has been the Living with Cystic Fibrosis podcast. For more information and to learn more about the Bonnell Foundation, visit our website at thebonnellfoundation.org. That's the BONNELL Foundation.org. This podcast was sponsored by Beatrice and Genentech. It was produced by Jag and Detroit Podcasts. Follow our show in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now.